This is day 5 of this mad project I've taken on called the 12 Days of Celtic Mythology. So, what we're doing is this. Every day, I'm telling a bit of a longish story called The Adventures of Art, Son of Conn. And then I'm bouncing off that story to take us down some less traveled back roads of Celtic mythology. So, this should help us make sense of this complex story, but it's also fun just to explore back roads. So if you'd like to read the story in full or hear me telling it all the way through, there are links in the video description for those things. So let me see if I can explain where we are in the story. Now we've got a king, and he's called Conn. And Conn has married a mysterious woman he met on a beach. And this woman is called Beikva. And she was originally in love with Conn's son, Art. Now, Conn knew that, but he ordered her to marry him instead because he was lonely and widowed. So for some reason, Beikva didn't tell Conn her real name. She said that she was called Delvkive. So that's interesting. Once Conn and Beikva stroke Delvkive got married, Ireland suffered a terrible famine. Conn's druids told him that the famine was because of Beikva, but he demanded that they think of a solution. So they suggested he find the son of a sinless couple and sacrifice him. So Conn set out on a quest to find such a boy. And he's just arrived in an otherworldly hall where he thinks he may have found what he's looking for, a boy called Shegda, the son of the king and queen who are showing him hospitality. So Conn was shown all hospitality in the otherworldly house. He was bathed and dressed, yet he never saw the hands which tended him, nor the hand that led him to the table. When he sat down, only he was served food. But Conn was under a gesh that he should never eat alone. They told Conn it was not the custom of their court for people to eat together. And he said, "But what shall I do? I have trouble enough in my kingdom as it is without breaking my gesh." Then Shegda offered to eat with Conn to save him from bad luck. The queen asked Conn what troubles he had in Ireland. So Conn told her how Ireland had been without corn or milk for a year, and that he sought a boy, such as Shegda. He told her how he believed that if the son of a sinless couple was simply bathed in the waters of Ireland, the famine would end. "Certainly, we will not lend you our son for such a ridiculous adventure," said the king. And the queen agreed. Conn was downcast, but presently Shegda said, "We should not treat a king of Ireland in this way. I must go with Conn. It is a simple thing to be bathed in the waters if it will put an end to suffering." So the king and the queen were persuaded to let the boy go, but they made Conn promise that he and all the kings and heroes of Ireland would be bound to keep the lad safe. Conn gave his promise that this would be so. Conn and Shegda set sail. Their journey was swift and fair. When they arrived back in Ireland, Conn had no choice but to tell his druids what he'd done, how he'd lied to the boy's parents and sworn on his honor and all the honor of all the great men of Ireland that the boy would be kept safe. A council was called, and the druids and the kings and warriors argued for days as to what should be done. Finally, it was Shegda who broke the deadlock when he said, "It is a simple enough thing to die if it will bring an end to the suffering of the kingdom. Go ahead and take my life." So let's just wind back to the scene with the king and the queen in the other world. Conn blatantly lies to them about his intentions. The druids have demanded that this son of a sinless couple be sacrificed. And if you're wondering what the son of a sinless couple is, look at yesterday's video and you'll find out all about it. But Con knows full well that no parent is going to agree to that fate of being sacrificed. So he tells them the lad's just going to be bathed in the waters of Ireland. And then it gets worse. Not only does he swear to keep Shagda safe, he swears on behalf of all the other kings and heroes of Ireland, without their permission, that they will also protect the very boy that he plans to kill. So carelessness with his word is just about the worst thing a hero can do in these stories. I've mentioned before that the underlying theme of this story is sovereignty, a compact between a king and a female sovereignty figure, perhaps a goddess, which confers and confirms the king's right to control the land and its people. So the sovereignty elements in this story are a bit buried under the complexities of its plot and its subplots, and this can make them a bit hard to see. So I want to peel back a bit of the clutter and look at a very simple type of sovereignty tale today, which has the most basic structure and elements. And I think once you've seen this, a lot of things might make sense about other Celtic stories. Things might look a bit different to you. If you like my videos, please share them, comment, or give them a thumbs up. There's more free content on my Patreon page and on my website. If you're feeling spontaneous, you could buy me a cuppa on Ko-fi right now. All the links are below this video. So this kind of story is usually called a fairy bride story, and Welsh folklore is especially rich in these. So I'm going to tell you one now, a little story. So it's story time again. And then we'll look at the structure together. So here we go. There was a young man, the son of a shepherd, and he was looking after his sheep one morning out on the hill. It was a bit misty, and as he came to a peat stack, he realized that there was a very pretty girl sheltered against the stack, and she was crying. And he went to her and he tried to comfort her and to find out what the trouble was. Well, the two were immediately smitten with one another, but before she could tell him why she was crying, her father appeared, and he led the girl away without saying much at all to the shepherd, quite a stern fellow. Over the next few days, the young man spent every minute he could lingering by that peat stack, hoping to see the girl again. And the girl wanted to see him too, but it was days before she managed to slip away from her father. When she finally did, he soon guessed where she'd gone. By the time the father caught up with them, she and the young man were sitting together and they were talking of love. And the father, he could see the young man was a good sort and that the boy and girl, they were in love. They truly loved each other. So after a bit of persuasion, he agreed to their marriage. The father, however, revealed to the shepherd that he and his daughter were of the fairy race, the Tulwith Teg. And he made it clear there were dangers for the girl in marrying a mortal, and warned the young man that if he ever struck the girl with iron, the marriage would be at an end. And with that, he gave the shepherd's son a bag of gold as a dowry. Well, it was a good match. The couple got on well together. They had children. One day they were trying to catch some ponies to take to a fair, but the ponies were a bit wild and they weren't having much luck. Finally, the man got very close to one pony and he was just about to grab it and get it by the mane and get the bridle on, and all of the ponies galloped off again. The shepherd had had enough, and in a rage, he flung the bridle at the departing ponies. But somehow, quite by accident, the bridle hit his wife, and the bit, which was made of iron, struck her. Well, within a few seconds, her father appeared with a whole host of her people, took the woman away, and she went with them quite willingly, without even saying goodbye. Although the dowry of gold was left behind, the shepherd was heartbroken, and the children were motherless. So, as I said, there are many such stories, especially in Wales, and each one has specific details which make it unique, but they also have a common structure. So let's just take a little look at that and think about what it might mean. In these stories, a man, usually a farmer, courts a fairy woman, And very often this fairy woman comes out of a lake. In the particular story I told, it's different. And these stories do have different little details. Then the father places a condition on the man in order that he can marry the woman. This might be never striking the woman in anger, never striking her 3 times, never striking her with iron. The woman brings a dowry. Now, in our story, it was gold, but very often it's livestock, cattle and sheep. Inevitably, the husband breaks his bargain, and it's usually kind of accidental. In these fairy bride stories, it's always about striking the woman. He never knocks her about. This isn't a story of domestic abuse. It might be the lightest of taps or something, or it might be that the iron accidentally touches her, like in our story. The woman then leaves him when he has broken the taboo, and she takes her livestock with her. So the turning point in these stories is the farmer being careless and breaking the taboo. We have to remember that although his breaking of the taboo seems accidental, he knows he's under a taboo, and he should be super careful if he doesn't want to lose his lovely wife. So in the fairy bride stories, the taboo is usually related to touch, striking the woman or touching her in some way, however innocently. The harm done to the woman is really symbolic rather than actual. And I think that it's really the husband's carelessness which is at issue here. So the taboo placed by the father is really saying something like this: you've entered into a very sacred contract here. This woman is going to allow you to have more wealth, to take more from the land than you could without her. You have to keep constantly in mind this contract and behave impeccably at all times. Now, this is much the same thing that's accepted as of kings, as we talked about a couple of days ago when we talked about how kings were expected to be so very perfect. The farmer may not be as grand and beautiful and rich as a king, but the basic contract to oversee the land and extract wealth from it is similar. And his responsibility to be extremely attentive and respectful is also similar. So in a couple of other well-known stories, it's the man's carelessness with his word rather than the woman's physical body which gets him into trouble. Like in The Debility of the Ulsterman, the story of Macha running in a horse race, it's Macha herself who warns her husband not to mention her when he goes to the fair. Of course, he gets a bit tipsy, blurts out something which offends the king. "My wife could run faster than the king's horses," he shouts, and this moment of carelessness brings about a cascade of misfortune on Macha and her husband and the entire kingdom. And of course, he loses her. The king demands that Macha runs the race against his horses, and this humiliation makes her angry so that she curses the men of Ulster. In the story of Rhiannon in the Mabinogi, she's chosen a husband, and this is Puich, the ruler of the kingdom of Dyfed. At their wedding feast, Rhiannon's rejected suitor approaches Puich with a seemingly innocent request. Puich carelessly replies that he'll grant him whatever he asks. The man demands Rhiannon. This seems particularly unfair because Puich received little or no forewarning. He didn't realize who the man was. He isn't breaking a taboo or a condition as such, but nevertheless, he's been careless. He's a king and his honor is paramount. He should have known better than to make an open-ended promise to a stranger. So the basic fairy bride structure is less obvious in the first branch of the Mabinogi, just as it is in the story of Art and Con. And that's because of all the extra plot devices and details that makes the story rich and enjoyable. However, much boils down to Puich being careless with the thing most precious to him as a ruler, the female sovereignty figure. So in Rhiannon's story, She manages to patch things up with a magic bag and some trickery, only for Puig to be a little careless a second time when he allows the rejected suitor to be unfairly abused. Although at first it seems that the couple have got away with it, it turns out that there are dire consequences for all this stuff, which only become apparent much later in Rhiannon's story in the third branch. So now that you know a bit more about the relationship between the female sovereignty figure and the male steward of the land, whether that's a farmer or a king, you'll be better equipped, I hope, to understand what's going on in the story of Art, son of Con. If it doesn't all make sense quite yet, that's fine. We've still got quite a ways to go. So I just want to come back to a couple of things in today's section of the story. First, we see Con being really careless with his word, and that's likely to have serious consequences in a story like this. It's certainly unlikely to improve things for Con. The other thing is Con's mention of his gesh, not to eat alone. And you'll hear this word again later in the story, and you may know it from other Irish stories. And so I'd like to take a quick look at that. So if you know this word, the first thing you think of is probably taboos and prohibition. So we often hear that someone is under a gesh in Irish stories. Often it's something to do with food. They mustn't eat certain food or certain kind of meat, perhaps, or they mustn't refuse hospitality. Of course, in Irish custom, you shouldn't refuse hospitality anyway, but maybe that lets us know that a gesh takes us a bit beyond custom. Geshes often become gesha, often become a plot device where someone is faced with a dilemma. To avoid breaking their gesh, they must do something terrible, or perhaps by avoiding breaking one gesh, they have to break another one. So often we don't know why the person has their gesh. We don't know why Con must never eat alone. Again, if it's the meat of a particular animal, there might be a totemic element, if the animal they're named after or something like that. At other times, someone has placed a gesh on them. It's a form of a magical spell. Apparently, we'll see this later in our story, a gesh can simply be something more like a demand or a forfeit. Just a bit like saying, if you don't do what I ask, you're going to lose face. Give me the thing or else. So in a sense, the breaking of a gesh is just another form of carelessness and inattention. I think characters in stories often do a better job of keeping track of their gesha than they do of not mistreating sovereignty figures. I guess that's a typical human failing. We're more likely to consider personal consequences than things which may ultimately be a lot more important. So I'm going to leave it there for today. If you're enjoying these live streams, please don't forget to make a donation on Ko-fi, because I don't make any money from ads or anything on YouTube. You'll find the link in the chat and in the description, and I hope to see you tomorrow.